During the pentagram rite, I saw a light, bright green glow out the north of the temple. With the first set of vibrations, I saw a darker, twisted ribbon. I saw the aura around me and the cat grow in lime green, almost yellow. With the fifth set of vibrations, with the fourth, there was a darkness of blue that descended and ascended. With the third, there was an odd weaving of sorts, of some sort of not quite a cloud, but some sort of blobby green that was more of a forest green. I didn't feel my weight during the second set of vibrations. And the shadows were an almost black green. During the final reading, I felt at times like there was a weight upon me, a weight that had nothing to do with the cat and was uniform and in all directions as it pressed in. I eventually felt a storm of analgesia come down me. I wasn't cold, so I don't know the trembling, but it may have been because of the cause of the analgesia. And it seemed that there was some filling of spaces with green. It wasn't a completeness all over the place, but there was like a filling of some spaces. Like the cracks and stuff, I guess. Which is why I don't go over there except long enough to grab something off the shelf, because there's loose bricks and stuff. And in the final scrying, I felt a movement, and it didn't go through me like the blue tiny little specks around the time of the second set of vibrations that, it went down and, through. Like there were particles that weren't physical and they just went through the physical matter. But there was red and a forest from horizon to horizon beyond even that big that burn up in a flash. The index has some interesting little tidbits, not just tidbits, but quotes of Jim Jones and stuff that you may want to see if you get the book that, weren't included in the main thing. Like, you could make the argument that Billy Graham was part of his convincing of how the Christian idea of deity wasn't referring to the real deity. I mean, I guess in parts it would have been, but you know what I mean. And there's some other things that we learn about in this book, like the government infiltrator that survived the whole thing. Well, what happened with him? He was so convinced by the end of the movement that after it all was done, he was like, I don't want to be disassociated from this, because people were disassociating, and he ended up killing himself too. You find out that 3 of the 914 people died by gunshot. But as we've seen earlier, it wasn't so much that Jim Jones hated whiteness. He hated that culture. Nowadays, we don't have to think of this division into white culture and black culture and secular Jewish culture, although they, it's a little bit different with that. And maybe nowadays we can look at which groups actually drove some of these issues. And we can think of how some of these things have been done before. Jim Jones took certain teachings that others thought of as figurative when they used the word suicide. He meant it literally. And the reports of the death camps, I mean, the numbers may not have been real, what he was hearing, but, definitely some of the stuff that went on there, like he thought about it and he said, hey, there's going to be less pain in this world. And he thought of himself as like the true follower of Jesus with his, that Jesus laid down his life when he said that he was going to lay down his life at no other time. So he was in total control of it. And, of course, that whole communism thing, I've mentioned it in the other couple programs that, well, as long as communism is in your heart, it's just like nowadays with some of the Christians and the whole, as long as love's in your heart, you can basically do anything that even the Bible or whatever tells you not to do. And it's like, then you can justify anything. And that's one of the things, is you have to admit that movements like this were, they had their points of causes, and they had their goals of results. Their means that you went towards to approach them weren't necessarily, the sort of thing that you'd want to be upon. And certainly the concerned citizens, I mean, that's what they were called, they're, things were provoked along in ways that, especially with some of the rhetoric, they should have known that that sort of thing wasn't to be done. And of course, when it came to the $9 million something that was to be distributed, the government took half, the lawyers took half of what was left after that, and people got as little as $29 a person that were the families of the survivors and all that. So, we know that part isn't just. And certainly when certain actions are undertaken, it may result in more criticism and persecution of the memory than would have been for the living. So what can we say about the disinherited? About those who want to direct their lives towards change? How might this be done without that? How might we be real about death? Approach it willingly without it being a thing of, bringing harm to oneself. It wasn't Kool-Aid, but Flavor Aid that was the drink. that they poisoned with cyanide. The People's Temple owned their own press at one point, and they tried to work their way towards competing with the big newspapers. The People's Temple did try to find other ways of escaping their situation. Definitely moving to a different country and negotiating their way, or acting in a way that sort of won a conflict was part of it. Obviously, the Soviets were one of the groups that they even attracted a delegate from it. There's a sadness to separate from the things of this world, but it shouldn't be a sadness that, oh well, that's it. Past life regression was one of the things that helped ease that idea for people. Of course, we can protest and survive. We can approach conflict here